So we'll go ahead and get going. It's going to be kind of a casual day. We have a slight project to take a look at, a couple like websites and kind of tools to check out. But then I hope to leave most of the time to like questions and like discussion or anything else anyone wants to talk about. And we might not even go the full time, but we'll see how the day takes us. So if you haven't yet, I put the link to this project in the chat. And when you open it up, it should look like this. It's going to be like my project in Replit. But to make a copy of it, to kind of edit it and see it like you own it, go ahead and click on this button up in the top right on the page, and then you'll make a local copy of it that way. Okay. Yeah, so we'll begin with just taking a look at this website that we have, and we'll kind of see how it was made and like why I made it this way. And we'll take a look at all the code. Instead of filling in the code as we go, I have the code pre-made, and we'll just kind of glance down the way just to save some time so we don't have to type as much. But stop me along the way if you have any questions as we go. So let's take a look at the website itself. So it's kind of like a meta website. It's a website about this class, just to have an easy, topic to put into it, because the topic is kind of second to the coding skills. So right now we've done the 3 languages that we need to develop a website. In week 1, we did HTML, which was just the content and the meaning behind the elements. And if we take a look at this page, what I've done is I've just used a little button to take out all the CSS. So as we can recall, HTML is basically just black on white. There's no style to it. It's just text stacked up. So the HTML is not too bad. We see all my elements. They all kind of look mostly the same. We see some like images and stuff on the page, just kind of full size and stuff like that. But then if we add in the CSS, we can see a lot of stuff is going on. And in combination with that, we can use JavaScript to change the HTML and CSS on the page. So right now, this is the whole page. It's just this one little thing. But we can see when we mouse on these buttons, we can see the mouse changes and they look slightly clickable. And if we go ahead and click on any of these, we can see we get a new box of content that fills the website. And then if we click on a second one, we see the initial one goes away and it gets replaced with the second box of content, this being like the CSS section of the page. If we can see some links that we'll look at a little bit today. And then if we click on the last one, we can see, again, some JavaScript is happening to listen to us clicking on the page and then changing the, in this case, the visibility of some elements on the page. So we can click these, and then any one we click on, that's the only one we can see, and everything else goes away like this. So this is what's called a one-page application, or actually a single-page application. And it's a fun, stylish thing to do if you have kind of like a small website with not a whole lot of content. And although we know how to make multiple web pages and just link between them, it kind of takes away from making a really good kind of like up-to-date website if we just had 3 web pages with only a tiny amount of content and you had to click and jump pages, as opposed to having something like this when you have fun buttons on the page and the page seems really dynamic and responsive. So since we have so little content, we've done this instead of having 3 HTML files, which we kind of did in week 1, if you have a lot of content and you want to divide it up by web pages, in this case, we just all have it on the same page, and we go ahead and toggle the visibility of these elements using JavaScript. So if we take a look at, we'll just go into the HTML, because obviously this won't be invisible, even though on the page some of it goes away. We can see it's really simply made. We just have a couple divs up at the top. We have kind of a whole box, which is kind of this box. In it, we just have 3 buttons with some H2s in it. So we just have an HTML button. We can see it has an ID and a class of toggle on it. And that's a hint that probably the JavaScript is going to listen to that, and the CSS is going to change, because we can see a lot of like custom IDs and classes on things that'll help us pick out what we want to show and hide on the page. But we'll keep going. We just have one less button on the page just by itself. And this is just laid out using CSS grid, which you can check out in the style page. And that we looked at a little bit in week 2, just to get it in 3 columns side by side. Next, we can see we just have a div that's called intro, and we just have a little text blob on it. And we can see that kind of stays the same any way you go on the page, so that is always on the page. But then we can see the stuff that is changing as we click down the page. We can see we have a class content, and this looks like a big div, and we see if we collapse it, it's almost 100 lines of code long. So that's probably all of this hidden content, you know, this hidden content, this one, this one, this one, probably all that code is inside this. And we can see we have a second line of divs. We can see we got a box class div, and it has an HTML tag on it. And then we see a box CSS, and we see a box JavaScript. So what we've done with the divs in this case is we've wrapped all of the content of each of these boxes as we click the button, and we just wrapped it in a div with some classes on it. So when we use the JavaScript to show and hide this, we just kind of have to find this div, and then we can show and hide it. And we can show you what we've done is there's a CSS property called display. All of these right now have a display none, which means it's basically invisible, and it doesn't take up any space on the page. It's not like a white empty space. It's just no space at all. But if we just manually quickly just add on a style attribute to one of these divs and say display block, and then we run it, we can see this must be what we've done in the JavaScript. We've toggled the display style value, because we see when we load the page with this switched, it shows up with it on the page, as opposed to previously when it had to wait on us to click the button. So that's all the CSS we've done, really. It's just dependent on that one display CSS rule. And so with that in mind, let's take a look at the JavaScript today and see how we can interact between these buttons, these divs with a class of box, and how we can toggle on and off what they look like. So we can see from the top of the page, we see some stuff that we used just last class in the JavaScript class. We go ahead and say, okay, on this document, select all of the toggle class items. And if we just jump back real quick, this we saw up in these buttons. All these buttons have a class toggle. So all of these we have the page listening to, and anytime we click on them, we call on some function. We looked at these last time. I'm taking each of my buttons. I have a little JavaScript loop going on. Basically, I'm just saying I have a whole list of buttons, let me look at them each one at a time. I'm going to index to get button 1, button 2, button 3. And to each of those, I'm going to say, hey, listen to this event, clicks. And if it's clicked, go ahead and call the toggle function. So that bit of it is quite easy. We can do that. And then we can go down to see what happens once we get into the function, once we've clicked on it. And we can see we have function toggle. And the point of this function is anytime a toggle button is clicked, hide all of the box class elements except the one corresponding to the one that we clicked. So we have an HTML button, and then we have an HTML box, CSS button, CSS box, like that. One new thing today, and JavaScript has a ton of syntax, a ton of functions, and a ton of fancy things. We can see I have something called this, making some object. So I'm saying let lm, as in let element, equal this. And I haven't defined this anyplace on the page, but this is actually something special. It's not something I made and that I defined. It's something that the page and the function gives me automatically. So what's happening is anytime we add an event listener to some element, and then we call a function on it, we automatically get access to, inside the function that we call, the thing that we clicked on, and that's always called this. So if we take a look, I say let lm equals this, this that we get access to, and then I do a console.log, and let's go ahead and see what that looks like. When I click, we can see I'm saying, let's print this element's text content, its class list, and its ID. And we can see I got HTML as its text content. I know it had toggle as a class. We can also see it now has active as a class, and we'll see what that is in a couple seconds. And then we can see what the last thing is, ID. This HTML box has an ID of just HTML as well. And if we switch between these, we can see the things printing out just like that. So inside this toggle thing, I now have access to all the information about the button I clicked using this special this syntax. And what we want to do is we want to say, okay, let's let something called tag be equal to the element ID. So in this case, if I click on this one, the ID is HTML. If I click on this, its element ID is CSS, and this is JS, as in JavaScript. And we'll hang on to that a minute. And let's go ahead and do a second little prep step to get the stuff that we want to apply some JavaScript to. So we have to do a second query selection. We say, go into the document, find all elements with a class of box. If we go back to my index.html, we can see that's all this hidden content like we saw in the beginning. So my HTML class box also has the class box, and same with CSS content and the JavaScript content. So now I have all these buttons, and I know which one I clicked. And now I have also in my hand called boxes, all of these boxes. And now I want to do some logic to basically toggle them on and off. If I click on this box, I want to show that corresponding box, but I want to hide these two boxes. And if I click on this one, I want to hide that HTML box that was just showing up and just show CSS. So what we can do is we can say on boxes, and then we have a special type of loop, meaning we'll take each of these boxes one by one, and we'll say we can take the one box at this stage in the loop, and then the next one, and then the next one, and we will apply all of this logic to each of the boxes. So we'll go one by one. And basically we'll do a simple check. we'll say if that box has the tag in its class list, let's set the style of the display to block. Else we'll set the style to none. Display none is invisible, and display block just means we can see it on the page. So if we back up again, we can see these boxes have as a class HTML, CSS, and JS. And up at the top, the buttons have IDs of HTML, CSS, and JS. And so basically the little trick that we've done is we've said, I click this box, I have an ID of HTML. That's what's going to be my little object called tag. And then I'm going to go to these boxes and say, hey, if my box has a class of what was the ID, which is now just called tag, if I have HTML as a class, I'm going to show it. Else, I'm going to hide everything else. So I only have one section of the page showing at once. So that's not too bad to achieve, actually. It's only a couple lines of code to basically change the whole way this site functions. And then we just have one last little step to add some presentation to the website. We've dealt with the boxes up this way. So all this stuff down below, this changing set of boxes, that's all handled. But we can see when I click on these buttons, it kind of changes its shape and its style. So obviously when I click something, something is also happening to the button itself, not just the classes down below. And that's what happens at this stage. So I say, okay, let me take all my buttons. I'm going to look at each of them one at a time. And I'm going to say, if button 1, its ID is equal to tag, I'm going to add an active class to my button. Else, I'm going to remove the active class from that button if it exists. So it might just not exist at all, but that's fine. It won't cause too much of a bug if we just say take it out, even if it doesn't exist. So if I go ahead and click on CSS, this is going to say, look at all my buttons. If HTML, so if I click on CSS, it's going to look at this one, this one, this one. This has an ID of HTML. It is not equal to tag because the tag is the ID of the button that we clicked on, so that's CSS. So it's going to remove an active class if it exists. The next one, this is the one that we actually clicked on, ID of CSS. ID of CSS is equal to CSS. It's the same thing. It came from the same element. Back up at the top using this syntax. We can slap on that active class. And then finally, we'll look at JavaScript. Same idea with this one. Its ID is JS. That's not equal to CSS. So we skip the if clause and jump into the else clause. And we take out the active class if we had it in to begin with. And then if we go ahead and jump a little bit into the style page, we can see a whole bunch of styles. Well, let's jump straight to the active class. And so we can see when I click on it, I get my active class. So I get a new background. I kind of get a 2-pixel line around the whole thing. And we can see when I put my mouse on top of it, which is this selection, I get a new radius. I get the little bending of the bottom section of this box. The box shadow changes as well to look like a little smile, I guess. I'm translating Y, and that basically just means take this element and move it 5 pixels up since it's negative. And I'm going to change what the mouse looks like. That you can do with CSS. So when I put my mouse on top and I get the little hand, that's all because of this CSS, which happens when I hover on this toggle class element. So when I'm hovering on top, I get all these changes. And when I just have the active class, I keep those changes. I don't need to hover still. because I've added the active class. So I maintain those changes, and I get these new backgrounds and a thick line around it like that. So that is essentially the gist of this web page is kind of a presentation. We tried to keep it simple. We don't want a website. You can see kind of we have a lot of content in each of these sections. So if we did all of the content stacked on one by one, we'd have to scroll down the page a whole lot, and that'd be kind of not the best design. So we did it this way instead of doing it that way. And instead of having a separate page, having to click links, reload the page, and then have pages with kind of minimal content and minimal, cool stuff like this. Does anyone have any questions about, like, I guess especially the JavaScript today and how we did that? We use most of the same functions and things that we did in the last class, just with a new application and kind of like a real life application, as opposed to what we did last time when we kind of did these like goofy things just as a little demo practice. If not, I'll just, we'll look at the content of the page now that we know how to build it if we want to. So we can see, actually, let me pop this open again. So I do want to talk about now a couple things to like help you as you go on and keep studying all of this. So we'll take a look at all the HTML stuff. In this list, I have a couple links to kind of review HTML and maybe do some stuff we didn't get time to in this class, since we only had one class to each language. So this is my favorite website, W3 Schools. You can see off to the side, each of these is its own little lesson. And you can see it's got a whole ton of stuff that we didn't quite get to in the class, just based on time. And if we go to any of these pages, we can see we get lots of simple, nice looking lessons. And on this website, you can actually code live, change it, and then run the code, just like we've done in CodePen and Replit, to kind of take a look at the lesson, change things, and see what the HTML is doing. So this is a really good website to go back and review, see what we haven't done, and catch up on the way to getting to like some advanced skills. Along with that, Code Academy is quite good. It's the same gist. It's the basics of HTML, so it's a good place to begin or do a little review coming off of this class. It's taking a minute to load. And then lastly, Free Code Camp is a good place to go as well, although it's not as neatly laid out as W3 Schools and Code Academy. It's a lot of like little mini lessons on all kinds of different topics. Some of them might be kind of like basic stuff, like how to use a text box using input fields. And then some of them might be kind of advanced. So this might be the site that you look at last once you review as much as you need to get the basics down. We'll leave that. So that's how we can get caught up just on the basic skills from this class. But then what do we do once we have all the basics down? Well, one good thing you can always find on the web is find like code generating tools. So they can see this one is going to generate HTML. We'll look at some that generate CSS. And what these basically do is you can basically, like we'll take an example. we'll say, let's choose a date and time input. It's going to show us what this little HTML element looks like. It's going to show us the code with all the attributes and things included. And it's going to let us change how we want to make this element. So we can see the full potential of all these elements without needing to know it ahead of time. We can kind of quickly look at this page and see all that's possible. So if instead of choosing a date, we can say, oh, the input element can be type month too. Instead of just choosing a specific day, you can choose a month just like that, just by changing the type attribute. You can see you can change this, and as you change these fastest on the side, this is changing as well. We can change the default value if we want to make that June. And then at the end of the day, you have this finished little snippet. And then you can like take that, put it on the page, any page you want, and you get exactly what you made on that site. So these kinds of tools are really, really useful for seeing like the full potential of all these, all the little attributes and things that you can add into these guys. And then just kind of, steal the code. It's not stealing because this is the basic way to do it. This is the only way to do it. So it's not plagiarizing, obviously.
Matt, can you add that to the chat, that website?
Oh yeah. Yeah, so that's that one. It's also on the page as well in the HTML box. Let me just do a couple ones besides that, just to kind of like review HTML, but then see all the stuff that we didn't quite get to in this. We can see a lot of input stuff. We did a little input in the JavaScript lesson. All of these are a type of input, how to let the someone visiting the website enter some data and then submit it, and then it could be submitted to like the website database if it's something like Facebook, or it could just be submitted and taken up by JavaScript if you just kind of make local changes on the page. So a lot of these input elements have a lot of association with JavaScript because you need JavaScript to accept the data that's put in and then do something with it. So we can see input element is always the same, and then you just change the type attribute. You can do an email, file input, which we see on websites all the time. That's quite easy to do with HTML. We just change type equals file. And then we can see we can even change like what acceptable file types that you can choose. So you can let people submit images and PDFs, but nothing else. You can allow multiple files. And we can see if we look to the right, it's basically just adding this multiple attribute to the element. We can do the same with this, toggle this on and off if someone has to submit it or doesn't have to submit something. So this is really useful to kind of get the full scope of what's possible. You can see, I know someone asked about like showing videos on the page. We obviously did some images, and we know what an image element is, and we know how to put them in the file system on Replit, give it some alternate text and choose a width. But it's just as easy to put a video on a web page. If I uploaded a video file to my Replit page in this media box, then I could just come to this page and copy this code. I want a video, I want to set a height and width, and then basically I just get the file within my file system and just say its type is a video. And we can even do things like we can add an autoplay. So if I click that, that just automatically begins playing as soon as the page loads. You can loop it. So when you get to the end of the video, it keeps coming back. You can mute it. So when the video begins, the volume isn't on. A lot of people will thank you if you do that. And you can see you have a whole bunch of these elements to take a look at, see how to build them up, and not struggle too much, like Googling things and all that. You can just come to something like this, choose which element you want, play with the settings, and then just copy the code like that. So things like that. This specific website that we just looked at, it's quite good. But you can do that kind of stuff from any website. You can just type in, like HTML generator and see what comes up. You can see you have a whole bunch of options to see what kind of cool tools you can find online. But kind of like 10 steps up at once from something like generating, 2 lines of code to make an input button is what's called Bootstrap. If we go to this site, Bootstrap is basically, it's pre-made HTML and CSS, actually. You get both. You get the content and the style applied to it at once. And it's basically, we can think of it as a coding shop. We can, let's go look in the components. Maybe we want to get a navigation heading on the page, or just kind of skim through. And we can see on these pages, we have examples of the kind of elements that we can just quickly put on the page. And then we see we have all the code pre-made to begin with. And we see we have a whole bunch of options just within this navigation element. As we keep going down, we have a whole bunch of options to how to style it and make like drop-down lists and things. And so what Bootstrap is it's totally free and open to use. Anyone can come and use this code. Even businesses that make money off a website, it's still totally cool to use Bootstrap code. Totally open like that. And the only things that we need to do is we basically need to cite the style sheet, and we need to copy and paste the code. So let's take a quick example of how to get something quite big like this navigation element on the page. So we have a professionally done navigation element on the website that will be updated as Bootstrap updates, and it won't get buggy. And we don't have to spend a whole day coding every single thing by itself. This has been pre-made. No need to invent the wheel again. So what we need to do, all we need to do is just like in Replit, let's go back up to the HTML file. We have this head element, and we didn't talk about this too much in week 1. But again, the head element is just all the elements on the page that you don't actually see on the page. It's kind of all the background meta info about the site. So we say like what alphabets we use, some information about like the sizing of the screen. We see the title of the web page. We link to the style sheet that we have locally. And at this point, we can link to Bootstrap's style sheet, which won't be a file in the file system, but it's going to link to just Bootstrap's web page, which has all the CSS on it. So we can just go, we need the CSS link. We can just click copy. I'm just going to stick it back in my head. You can see it's just a website. And then let's go back to Bootstrap, back to components, go back to nav. And let's say I want this example. I just copy all of this at once. And then I'm going to go down my page. I'm going to pick a place on my page to put it. Put some space so we can see it. And then I can just paste it all like that. So Bootstrap gave me all of this code. We can see we have a lot of classes on it, and all of those classes will be styled by this web-based style sheet that we put up at the top. Let me just indent this. So now if we run the website, we have the CSS, we have the HTML now. And let me pop it open actually. And now we can see, well, we have a slight bug, but we have what we saw on the Bootstrap page. We have a navigation. We can change this to like the website name to make that like a home link button. We have some links. And we have all of this functionality as well. Two things. One, we noticed that it looks like my own CSS is affecting this button. So we'll have to change that and fix that. And we'll see how to do that in case that happens to you. And then we see, I'm trying to click on this drop down, but it's not showing up. So what we have to do, go back to Bootstrap, go back to home. And what we actually need is they give us a CSS style sheet, but they also give us a JavaScript style sheet as well, a script sheet. So let me copy that. I'm going to go back up, put it in my head element. We can run this page. And now we can see this is a JavaScript based action. I'm clicking and getting something. So that's why I needed to include the JavaScript as well. And you can see when we resize the page, it nicely changes into like a mobile edition of the navigation element. So Bootstrap is a really nice way to get professional code on the website without needing to code it manually. And it has all types of things. We can see, we can get stuff like this, like how do we do this? Well, we might kind of know how to do that. We kind of did that today with the JavaScript toggling display none and display block. But it would still take a couple minutes to set that all up when we can just use the Bootstrap code on this page. So we could steal this if we wanted. We could steal some like message pop-ups from the page. They have a whole slew of pre-made styled buttons we could use. They have little like box elements on the page. If you want to have like a slideshow of images and things like that, that's quite a complicated thing to make. But you can just use what they have and you can just use this code. And you can see we can just get all of this free without having to pay. Totally fine to use. Let's go back and see. So we can see Bootstrap is quite good. We just have this slight bug of my CSS is affecting Bootstrap's elements. So let's go down and we can see it looks like it's affecting this home button. So let's find that element. So I can see this is my navigation. I'm just going to jump and I see home. So this is obviously that button. And I can see it's a link and a list. That makes sense. And I can see Bootstrap also uses a class called active. So we have classes, two classes that mean two different things. So the CSS styling is getting confused because we have two things with the same name. So let's go ahead and see how we can fix this. We pull this open so we can see it. Minimize this. So we can see this is my active, and this is why it's affecting it. But how can we fix it? Well, we'll notice we can use some CSS selection to deselect all the stuff inside this. So we can notice all of my buttons I have in the main element, and all this navigation is in the header elements. So what I can do is I can come into this and I can say, instead of just choosing all active classes, I'm going to say all active classes within the main element, and same thing down this way. And that way I'm excluding anything in my navigation. And now when I play this, we can see now it's been deselected and just the Bootstrap code is being applied to it. And now I have a really nice navigation at the top of my website, mobile responsiveness. So that's good to go now. Any questions or like any questions about Bootstrap? It's quite a big thing to use. You have a whole bunch of elements that you can use. A lot of people coding, just as hobbies, and making like professional websites all use it. So it's a really big tool to anyone doing web development. Okay. So we looked at Bootstrap. And then something else I want to touch on today is something called iframes. And basically the question is, we have a lot of content that we might want to put on a website. We might want to put a video. We might want to put, in this case, I have like a slideshow. This is like a PDF, like that. I might even want to put my code pen on the page. I might want to embed a Google poll on my page. So what an iframe is, and let's go to this. You can see all those things we just looked at, the video, the slideshow, the code pen. All of those come in packages called an iframe. That's the element it is. And what it basically is it's taking a second web page that's not my own. This is a YouTube video page. It's taking that page and allowing me to embed it on my own page in some box that I can style so it's the size that I want and things like that. And you can see you can set the settings of this video. But basically, I'm allowed to get content from different websites and put it on mine without, in this case, hosting my own video, without, in this case, hosting my own PDF file in Replit. If we look at this, if you want some type of poll on the site, it would take a lot of HTML, JavaScript, and a couple languages besides that to be able to accept data and like send it to you. If you don't have a dynamic website, if you just have a static website, it would take a lot of code to make that manually. But why would you do that when you could just make a Google poll in Google Drive and then just embed it on my website? So that's the useful thing about iframes. It lets you not take on huge coding projects just to do simple things like put a video on a page, make a like a feedback poll on the page. And how we get these, it's quite simple. We'll look at the YouTube one. If we go to like a YouTube video, this is the video from last class. It's always hiding on this page. If you go to the share button down like this, you may have done this and you may have copied just the web address to email it to someone. But anytime you see this little embed option with the little HTML symbol, if you click on that, you can see YouTube wants me to basically get this code. So I can copy this code just like that. And then if I go back, we can see this is the same code that I have above me. So just by going to YouTube and stealing some code that they want me to have because they want me to use YouTube, I can host the whole video on my site with a couple advantages. One advantage is that I don't need to have my own video on my site, because that's a lot of like bandwidth that people might use if I have a couple thousand people come into my site and I constantly have to send people full video files. That's a lot of bandwidth and things I have to pay with my hosting company. But if I use YouTube's iframe, it is YouTube that is keeping my video in its data banks. It's YouTube that's sending the video to people. So it's a good tool that way. It's also useful in this specific example of YouTube, because if I just had a video on my site, only people that came to my site would be able to see it. Well, in this case, people who come to my site can watch the video, but I can also have the same exact video on YouTube. So I have it in multiple places. I can have my video in as many places at once and, you know, get that kind of audience that way. So this is the usefulness of iframes. If we go down the page, we can see in the CSS section, we have a Google Docs iframe. We got this the same way. That's just an option in Google Docs. I won't show that one, but we just copy and paste it. And then if we go down to the JavaScript, actually this one, we can see we have an iframe as well. This is my Google Drive. This is the feedback poll that I made and sent out. And we can see if I click on send, I could email it to people. I could send people the link. But as usual, you have an embed option and you can just copy this code, put it on my site. And then I'm basically including like a little mini Google Polls page on my site without having to code it all myself.
Matt, I have a question.
Yeah.
So who is Milk, you know, the server? How are you running this website?
Like this website?
Well, I mean, I realize it's on Replit, but
yeah,
is that it though? I mean, so are you going to discuss at all how to do website? What servers?
Yeah, so this is on Replit, but it's completely you know, it's a 100% a website. If we go to the web page, we can see I have a unique web address up at the top. If anyone goes to this website, like if you wanted to go to it now and just copy this, you'd be able to see my website. So that's a good question, like hosting and like how to get an actual website. Well, this, like I just said, this is an actual website. My content is on the web. Anyone can get to it using my web address. The thing with hosting is that it tends to obviously cost money because you have to have files in some data bank someplace, and anytime anyone accesses the website, it's some electricity usage and bandwidth and all of that. So if you have like a full website, it might cost a little money, but we have free options like this. We can see Replit, we get our own website. A second option is we used CodePen a lot in this class. CodePen is also, it's technically hosting a fully evolved website. It's only one web page, but it's still hosting a website. Anyone can get to it. Some other options for having your own space on the web with a custom web address is something like GitHub pages. GitHub, you can also upload files and have a static website, kind of exactly like Replit. It's free. You can just get a GitHub account, and then you have a place on the web. You'll have a custom web address. It's going to be at github.com, but it's going to be like myname.github.com, like that. Like if you have like a actual website, like the library website, obviously my web address is not at, you know, milburnlibrary.replit.com. And that's because I bought the domain name, this web address. Well, we bought it. And we also pay a company to keep all the files and handle the bandwidth of people accessing the website like that. So like I said, it costs some money to like host a, I won't say an actual website, but like a big website that's going to have a lot of traffic. But at this stage, when we just do these little projects, this is fully a website. Anyone can get to it. We can upload files, images, videos, have as many pages as we want. We get a unique web address like this. So this is a full website at this point. And at this stage, with what you and I can do, this is all we really need. We don't need to pay a whole bunch if we can just use these free options with the little, projects that we have at this point. One last hosting option that I want to mention, like places to host a website, is something called Google Sites. And Google Sites is unique from the last couple we've talked about. This whole class we've been doing coding. We've been doing HTML, CSS, and JavaScript so we can make websites from scratch. But what Google Sites is, if you at the end of this class realize you don't like coding too much, or you think it's going to take too long to build a full website, building up skills that you need, Google Sites is a non-coding free website making tool. So we can see I basically opened a kind of template website. We can see it looks just like a website. This looks kind of like that Bootstrap thing we did. We have a navigation with links to pages and things like that. But instead of coding the elements on the page, making a div, putting in H1, using some CSS to put this in the middle, it's a kind of like a visual website building tool. So instead of using code, I just kind of add elements like this. I can add a text box. I can just kind of click and drag to kind of visually build a website. I can choose from some layout options like this. And then I can publish my site. We publish it. And then we can go visit what this actual site looks like now. So we can see, just like Replit, we kind of sell the behind the scenes. But now I can see I have my own website at sites.google.com, but we can see I have my email and my name and the project and all of that. And we can see we have a full website, and all of this came just in the template. I didn't even make any of this. So stuff like this, it's called a what you see is what you get editing tool. And it's basically non-coding and just using these kind of click and drag pre-made kind of box elements onto the page. And it's like a visual building tool instead of using the code. So if you just need a simple website for a club or a charity thing, and you don't want to code it all by hand, or you think it would take too long, Google Sites is different from the rest, and it might be the easiest option just to get some content on the web, have it be accessible by anyone, have a unique web address to get to it, and things like that. Okay, so on these two boxes, I have a lot of the same stuff, some introduction lessons to CSS and JavaScript. We obviously didn't get to all of it in the few lessons that we had. Especially with JavaScript, we couldn't do all of it. JavaScript is a massive language relative to HTML and CSS. It could do a lot of the stuff, we didn't even look at, we even talk about. So yeah, that might be something you have to go on with on your own. And then if we don't have any questions at the moment, I do have one last thing I want to talk about. And that is something we've been kind of mentioning along the way, but we haven't like fully taken a look at. And that is what's called the inspect tool. You can do this on any website. You can do it in Chrome, in Edge, and Mozilla. And it's basically development tools to let you access the code behind any web page. So we could, we could go to a page that we don't know, the library website, and then we can say, right click and click on inspect. I'll show you again, you can just right click, inspect is usually at the bottom. And then we can see, this is basically in this little pop-up window, the plain text file, the HTML file that we downloaded when we accessed this website. So when I told Chrome, go to this website, all it essentially did, like we talked about in the beginning, is just download a couple files. It downloaded an HTML file. It has a CSS file. It might have a JavaScript file and a couple things besides that, depending on the website. And then we usually see all of it combined, displayed nicely. But we can also see the code behind it. And in addition to seeing the code behind it, this is a useful tool if you go to a website and you want to know how do they do that, what would happen if they did something else at that page. We can see like this was made with an H3 element. If I put my mouse on top, it's going to show me its place on the page. So that's the HTML side. But we can also see the CSS down in the styles tab. And we can see all the CSS that's being applied to it. And we can even change that CSS. So we can see I have this navy blue applied to it, and I can just check that off and it just becomes, it's probably a default black. I can tweak the CSS font size and I can change it. But I can also add anything I want to this. So I can say, I want to see what this page would look like if it had green font, and then I can apply. And I can basically, since I just have text files of all these websites that I visit, I can change it as I see fit in kind of this like sandbox mode using these inspect development tools. So we can change and add and even delete this CSS. This is all editable. If we go back up this way, we can see if I right click, you can edit. We can even delete this and then it deletes it off the page. So we can kind of play around with websites to see how something was made. What would it look like if we did something else? So we can use all these things available to us. If we like delete the whole body element, we see we get no website. But as soon as we reload the page, we just get all of it back. Because again, it's just a sandbox mode, obviously. And then, so we have HTML, we have CSS options. And then we've looked at console last time. Console is the JavaScript console. So we can use JavaScript commands in this box. So I can just log my own message. I can use JavaScript to find some elements on the page like we did in the last couple lessons, like that. So as you get into web development, this is a big tool that a lot of people use. Not only can you see what's available on someone else's website, but you can also use it on your own website as you build it up. Like I did when I was making this website. This website was new a couple months ago. I made the whole thing. And when it was in construction mode, what I would do is make all the code in the background in my HTML and CSS files. I would kind of see what it looks like live. But then instead of going back into the HTML and CS files, changing it, and then coming back what it sees like live, those couple of clicks, I can just, like we just did, change the CSS on the page, kind of use the sandbox mode to quickly update things and see what they look like. And then I can steal the CSS as I make it kind of on the fly like this and put it into my HTML and CSS files. So this is a really useful tool to see what other people have done and to help you with your own website like that. And we can see if we go to this website, inspect this, we can see a lot less complicated HTML. And this is exactly what we just saw in the editor box. So we can see we got my toggle buttons, we got my simple buttons, we have my content with my HTML boxes, CSS boxes, JavaScript boxes, just like that. And again, we can just tweak it as we want. We can see if you go to a website and don't quite know what something is doing, we can say, what is display grid is doing? Well, it's obviously making a grid out of this. What is this doing? It's putting a little spacing at the bottom of these elements. What is justified content doing? Well, it's putting things in the middle, and it looks like taking out a lot of the negative white space, things like that. So this, again, is a good tool to kind of practice on the fly and speed up how quickly you gain skills. Okay. So that is all my content today. We just want to do this quick project and then look at all the websites and things that you guys can go on to study as you build up skills. So if anyone has questions, anyone wants to discuss something, if anyone does some stuff on their own, they want to mention something I don't have on the website, you can go ahead and do that now. Let's see. Okay, yeah, if we don't have any questions, that's fine. I'll just say, keep at it. The best thing you can do with the field like coding is just to practice as much as you can. Unlike some fields when you can just like listen to a lesson and just kind of memorize it, coding is quite a practical field. So get into CodePen, do some replets, look at some websites with the inspect tool to see how stuff is done. And as you build up skills, you have to keep practicing them to really get a handle on things. You have to build up like a lot of like muscle memory as opposed to just memorizing something and saying, I know what CSS grid does. Because once you put it on the page and you have so much CSS going on, you might get a lot of conflicts. So you have to practice it live and get good with it that way. But if that's it, feel free to log out. I'll be posting this video on the YouTube channel as well, and I'll send it out quick. But thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Really great.
Yep, thanks, John.
Did you mention CSS Cuisine? What's it called? That's
Did you mean this one?
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so we did this. Yeah, we did this in the CSS class.
Yeah, it's really
but you can see we only went up to like lesson 10. This is how to, this is how to do selection to choose which elements you want to style. And you can see you have a lot of fancy stuff that you can get to.
Right. And then the other one was the froggy leapfrog. Yeah.
Yeah, this one.
Yeah,
yeah, so this is Flexbox, which is kind of a different way of doing CSS grid. It's like laying out and making columns and items like that. So this is the fun game to teach you.
There's a garden one as well.
And then CSS grid. This is what we've been using just simply to make some simple columns. But this is also an excellent way to get a handle on these things because of all the languages, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, I think CSS is the most finicky, not difficult, but finicky. You have so many CSS rules that you can apply. And within each one, you have an infinite variety of specific values that you can apply, seeing how they play off one another. So CSS is quite finicky. So it's good to have a couple games to play.
But I also think that's why
Yeah.
Bootstrap is really dynamic.
Yeah.
It more or less takes everything away. I mean, you more or less, it helps you a lot. So
Yeah. You don't have to code everything
right.
by hand, as long as you know what HTML does, what an element looks like, what CSS does. You can use Bootstrap to make a whole website, and that's not cheating at all, obviously.
No.
Yeah, that's what everybody does at the top level. They don't do it by hand. They copy and paste. They build tools to use.
The only thing we were told not to do is don't download Bootstrap. Do not download it. You see up there in the upper right, do not download it because you don't need to. You don't need to download it. You need to just copy it because that would just, you don't need all that powerful.
Yeah. You can just, like we said, you just copy the CSS link. And then basically when you load the website, it just says, let me go look at this website.
Right.
And we can actually take a look at it. It just says, go to this website and use its CSS. Oops. If we go to this website, we can see it's just a CSS file.
Right.
You can see some comments up at the top, and then it's all squished without spacing, but we can see, let's see if we can find like some body, a lot of classes, some font size rules. And this is everything that you can use. So you have a lot of options with it. Padding, all that kind of stuff.
Thank you.
So it's just a CSS sheet.
Yeah, no, it's great. The other thing we learned too is to learn about the Google fonts, is if you want to see the families of fonts, and when you're doing CSS, you want to know, be able, because you could see what you wanted, and then you're able to copy that for CSS. But I forget what it was. You have to be careful. Not all of the not websites. The not all of them are useful. So
yeah, so like with Google Fonts, so we looked a little bit. So like we know how to do like we know the CS rule font family. We might do like Times New Roman, but like built into CSS, you only have a couple fonts really. So if you want to do like a lot of custom fonts and things like that, that's what Google Fonts is. You can get this font. You can do all these fancy ones, some special Japanese ones, hundreds of types of fonts. And then when you go into them, let's see if it pops up. You should get a little like snippet that you just paste into the HTML. And that basically lets you like download it on the fly and be able to use this font. It should, maybe that one's not allowed. It's someplace on the page. You'll get, you don't need to download it, but I haven't used this in a while, but you should just get a little like embed option that just gives you a little link to copy and paste into the HTML. And then you get access to all these fonts.
Again, thank you. Have a wonderful snowy weekend.
Yep. Yeah, be safe.
Thank you.
Okay.
Too.
Thanks all. Have a good weekend. If we don't have any last questions.